The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name and nothing unusual ever really happened. People left their doors unlocked, children played outside until the sky turned orange, and neighbors often stopped by without calling first. Life moved slowly there, and that was exactly how everyone liked it. That evening had started just like any other. The air was calm, with a soft breeze moving through the trees. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A group of children had gathered near an open field at the edge of the town. It was their favorite place to play. The field was wide and slightly uneven, surrounded by tall grass and a few scattered trees. Beyond it lay a stretch of quiet farmland that seemed to go on forever. The three children who would soon disappear were among that group. They were laughing, running, and chasing each other without a care in the world. One of them had brought a small ball, and they were taking turns throwing it as far as they could. Their laughter echoed across the empty space, blending with the soft sounds of nature. Nearby, a few adults were busy with their evening routines. Some were preparing dinner, others were sitting on their porches. Enjoying the peaceful view, no one was worried. This was normal. This was safe. As the sun dipped lower, the light began to fade. The sky slowly shifted from bright colors to a deeper blue. One by one, the children started heading back to their homes. Parents called out from a distance, reminding them that it was time to come inside. But the three children stayed a little longer. They were still playing near the far end of the field, close to where the grass grew taller. It was the kind of spot where shadows formed quickly as daylight disappeared. Still, nothing about it felt dangerous. They had played there many times before. At some point, something changed. No one could later say exactly when it happened or what it was. There were no loud noises, no sudden screams. No signs of anything unusual. The evening remained strangely calm. Then, in a moment that no one witnessed, the three children were gone. It wasn't like they ran away. It wasn't like they were hiding. They simply disappeared. A few minutes later, one of the parents walked toward the field, expecting to find them still playing. When they didn't see them, there was no immediate panic. It was common for children to wander a little or go to a friend's house without saying anything. The parent called out their names once. Then again, a little louder this time. There was no answer. Thinking they might be playing a game, the parent walked further into the field. The grass rustled under their feet as they looked around. The light was fading quickly now, making it harder to see clearly. Still no sign of the children? A strange feeling began to grow something between confusion and worry. The parent checked the nearby trees, thinking the kids might be hiding behind them. Nothing. Within minutes, other parents arrived. They had also realized their children hadn't returned home. At first, they spoke calmly, assuming there was a simple explanation. Maybe they went to the road. Maybe they're at someone's house. But as they searched the area together, their calm slowly turned into concern. The field was not that big. It would have been impossible for three children to leave it without being seen. And yet there was no trace of them anywhere. The calls for the children grew louder. More desperate voices echoed in the evening air. Breaking the usual silence of the town, lights began turning on in nearby houses as people stepped outside, trying to understand what was happening. Within half an hour, the entire neighborhood was involved in the search. People brought flashlights and spread out in different directions. Some checked the roads, others moved toward the farmland, calling the children's names again and again, but something didn't feel right. There were no footprints leading away from the field, no dropped items, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the children had vanished into thin air. That was when fear truly began to set in. Someone called the local authorities. The police arrived quickly, their vehicles cutting through the quiet streets with flashing lights. Officers stepped out and immediately began asking questions. When were the children last seen? Who was with them? Did anyone notice anything unusual? The answers only made things more confusing. They were just playing. Everything was normal. No one saw anything. The officers searched the field carefully, using stronger lights now. They examined the ground. The grass, the surrounding area. They were trained to notice small details. But even they found nothing. No evidence. No clues. As the night grew darker, more help arrived. Volunteers from nearby areas joined the search. Dogs were brought in to track any possible scent. The entire area was covered again and again, but the result was always the same: nothing. The families stood nearby, watching helplessly. Some were crying, others were in shock. They kept hoping that at any moment the children would come running out of the darkness, laughing and saying it was all a game, but that moment never came. The peaceful town, which had always felt so safe, now felt completely different. There was a heavy silence in the air, broken only by the sounds of people searching and calling out names. As hours passed, the situation became more serious. The authorities began to consider possibilities that no one wanted to think about: kidnapping. But even that didn't make sense. There were no tire marks, no witnesses, no evidence of anyone being there. How could someone take 3 children without leaving a single trace? The question had no answer. By midnight, the search was still ongoing. Lights moved across the field like small stars, and voices continued to call out into the darkness. The town refused to give up, but deep down, everyone knew something was very wrong. Something had taken those children. And whatever it was, it had done so silently, quickly, and without leaving even the smallest clue behind. The night that had started so peacefully had turned into something no one in that town would ever forget. Far above the earth, far beyond the clouds and the sky that humans could see, there was something moving silently through space. It did not make any sound. It did not leave any visible trail. It was a large, advanced spacecraft, designed with technology far beyond human understanding. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than a faint shadow, almost invisible against the darkness of space. Inside this craft were beings who were not from Earth. They were not monsters, and they were not violent invaders like the ones shown in human movies. They were calm, controlled, and highly intelligent. Their purpose was not to destroy or conquer. Instead, they were part of a long and careful mission to observe life on different planets and learn from it. For a very long time, they had been watching Earth. They studied humans from a distance, collecting information about how they lived, how they communicated, and how they behaved with each other. They recorded everything: languages, emotions, social structures, and even small daily habits. To them, humans were fascinating but also unpredictable. Because of this, strict rules had been created. The most important rule was simple: do not interfere. They were allowed to watch, to record, and to analyze. But they were never supposed to directly interact with humans. No contact, no communication, no physical involvement. This rule existed for a reason. Interfering with a developing species could change its natural path. It could create fear, confusion, or even danger for both sides. Most of the crew followed this rule without question, but not all of them. Among the crew was a small group of lower-ranking members who had begun to think differently. They had spent a long time observing humans, especially children. They noticed how quickly children learned, how they showed emotions openly, and how they formed connections with each other. To these crew members, watching from a distance was no longer enough. They became curious. They started to believe that direct observation would help them understand humans better. They thought that if they could study humans closely, see their reactions, hear their voices clearly, and observe their behavior in a controlled environment, they could gather more accurate and useful information. At first, it was just an idea, a quiet discussion between a few of them. But over time, the idea grew stronger. They convinced themselves that what they were planning was not harmful. They were not planning to hurt anyone. They only wanted to observe. They believed that if they were careful, no one would even know. That was when they made the decision to break the rule. They began preparing for a small, secret operation. They studied different locations on Earth, looking for a place that was quiet and less crowded, a place where humans would not easily notice something unusual. They chose a rural area, small town with open fields and very little activity at night. They watched the area closely for several days. They observed the people, their routines, and especially the children. They noticed how the children often played in the same open field during the evening. They saw how the adults trusted the environment and did not watch the children every second. To the crew, this seemed like the perfect opportunity. They selected 3 children from the group. Not randomly, but carefully. They chose children who appeared healthy. Active and socially connected, they believed these traits would give them better data. The evening of the disappearance, the spacecraft moved closer to Earth. It remained hidden, using advanced technology that made it invisible to human eyes and undetectable by human machines. From below, the sky looked completely normal. Inside the craft, the crew prepared their equipment. They used a type of technology that could isolate and transport living beings without causing physical harm. It worked silently and quickly, leaving no marks and no signs behind. As the children continued playing in the field, laughing and enjoying their time, the craft positioned itself directly above them. Everything happened in seconds. A soft, unseen beam of energy reached down from the craft. It surrounded the three children without them even realizing what was happening. There was no pain, no loud noise, no warning. One moment they were standing in the field, the next moment they were gone. They were lifted into the air so quickly and smoothly that no one on the ground noticed anything unusual. The beam disappeared just as silently as it had appeared. Within moments, the spacecraft moved away from the area, rising higher into the sky, and then beyond it, the operation was complete. Inside the craft, the children appeared in a controlled environment. Clean, enclosed space designed for observation. The room was bright, but unfamiliar, with smooth surfaces and no visible doors or windows. At first, the children were confused. They looked around, trying to understand where they were. Just seconds ago, they had been in a field. Now they were somewhere completely different. Fear began to grow. They called out for their parents. They looked for a way out. One of them started to cry. The others moved closer together, holding on to each other for comfort. The beings watched from a distance. They did not speak. They did not approach immediately. They simply observed, recording every reaction. They noted how the children responded to fear, how they communicated with each other, and how they tried to make sense of the situation. Every movement, every word, every expression was carefully analyzed. To the crew, this was valuable data, but they did not fully understand what they were seeing. They saw fear, but they did not feel it. They saw tears, but they did not understand the depth of emotion behind them. They saw the children holding on to each other, but they did not fully grasp the importance of that connection. As time passed, the children's fear increased. They began asking questions, even though they did not know who would answer them. Where are we? What happened? Let us go home. Their voices echoed in the unfamiliar space. The crew continued to observe, still believing that they were doing no harm. They monitored the children's physical condition, making sure they were safe and stable. They even adjusted the environment to keep the temperature comfortable and the air suitable for human breathing. In their minds, they were being careful. They were following their own version of responsibility. But what they failed to understand was simple. They had already interfered. They had taken the children away from their world, their families, and everything familiar to them. Even without physical harm, the emotional impact was real and growing stronger with every passing moment. And while the lower-ranking crew members believed they were in control of the situation, they had no idea that their actions had already been recorded in the ship's system. They had broken the most important rule, and soon, someone far more powerful than them would find out. Inside the spacecraft, everything usually ran in perfect order. Every action was recorded, every movement was tracked, and every decision followed strict rules. Nothing was supposed to happen without approval, especially when it involved a species like humans. The system that controlled the ship quietly stored all data, including the actions of every crew member. At first, the unauthorized mission remained unnoticed. The lower-ranking crew members believed they had been careful enough. They avoided direct reports, kept their activity limited to a small section of the ship, and continued their observation of the children in silence. To them, it seemed like everything was under control. But the spacecraft was not something that could be easily fooled. All information eventually passed through the central system. Where it was reviewed by higher authority, this system was designed not just to store data, but to detect irregularities. It compared actions against protocols, looking for anything that did not match the rules. And then it found something. A simple line in the report triggered the alert. Specimens retrieved. 3 juvenile humans, The words themselves were enough. Within seconds, the system flagged the activity as a direct violation of mission protocol. The information was immediately sent to the highest-ranking authority on the ship, the leader. The leader was not like the others. He was older, more experienced, and deeply aware of the risks involved in their mission. He had studied countless worlds and civilizations. He understood how easily things could go wrong if rules were broken. Unlike the lower-ranking crew, he did not see humans as simple subjects of curiosity. He saw them as complex, unpredictable beings who were still developing. When the report reached him, he did not react immediately. He read it again, slowly. Making sure there was no mistake, specimens retrieved. 3 juvenile humans, for a brief moment. The command chamber remained completely silent. Then his expression changed. It was not anger in the human sense, but something very close to it, a sharp shift in focus. A sudden intensity that filled the room. Those who were present could feel it immediately. Without wasting any time, the leader activated the communication channel. "Explain this report," he said. His voice was calm. But there was a clear weight behind it. The lower-ranking crew members who had carried out the mission froze. They had not expected this moment to come so soon. For a second, none of them responded. "Answer immediately," the leader repeated. This time with more force, one of them finally stepped forward. "We initiated a direct observation procedure," the crew member said carefully. "We selected 3 human juveniles for controlled study. No harm has been caused." There was a pause. The leader stood still, processing the words, then he spoke again. But this time his voice was sharper. "You captured human children?" The question echoed through the chamber. No one answered. The silence itself was an answer. The leader moved closer to the central display where the data was still visible. He reviewed the details: location, time, method, and the current status of the children. Everything confirmed what he had already understood. The rule had been broken. Not a small mistake, not a minor error. A direct violation of the most important law they followed. "Do you understand what you have done?" he asked. One of the crew members tried to explain. "We believe direct observation would improve our understanding. The subjects are stable. We have maintained safe conditions." "Stop," the leader interrupted. His tone was firm, leaving no space for argument. "This mission is not about convenience or curiosity," he said. "It is about balance." The crew remained silent, listening. "You were given clear instructions," he continued. "Observe only, no contact, no interference." Another crew member spoke, trying to defend their decision. "We did not harm them. They are being monitored. Their behavior is providing valuable data." The leader looked at them, his expression unreadable. "You think harm is only physical?" he asked. The question caught them off guard. He continued, "You removed them from their environment. You separated them from their kind. You exposed them to something they cannot understand. That is interference." The room felt heavier with every word. The leader had seen situations like this before, on other worlds. He knew how quickly things could become dangerous. A single mistake could change the path of an entire civilization. "Humans are not a simple species," he said. "They are emotional, reactive, and unpredictable. Their development is not stable. Any disruption can create long-term consequences." The crew members began to realize the seriousness of their actions. To them, it had seemed like a controlled experiment. But to the leader, it was a risk far beyond what they could manage. "If their disappearance is noticed, and it will be noticed, it will create fear," he explained. "Fear leads to questions. Questions lead to investigation. And investigation leads to discovery." No one spoke. The leader turned his attention back to the data, then gave a direct command. "All observation activities are to stop immediately." The words were clear and final. The crew members exchanged quick glances, but did not argue. "The children will be returned to their original location," he continued. "No further interaction, no additional study." One of them hesitated before speaking. "What about memory retention?" they asked. That was the difficult part. The leader paused for a moment. Their technology allowed them to alter or erase memories. But it was not always perfect, especially with a species like humans. whose minds were still developing in unpredictable ways. If we erase everything, we risk damaging their cognitive stability, he said. If we leave everything, we risk exposure. It was not a simple decision. For the first time, the leader seemed to consider more than just the rules. He considered the children themselves, their age, their mental state, and what they had already experienced. Prepare for partial memory suppression, he finally said. The crew listened carefully. Remove direct visual clarity. Reduce environmental detail. Leave only fragmented impressions. This approach would make the experience feel unclear to the children, like a dream rather than a confirmed event. They might remember lights, shapes, or feelings, but not enough to fully understand what had happened. Let their own kind decide what to believe, the leader added. The decision was made. The crew immediately began preparing for the return procedure. But before leaving, the leader did something unexpected. He accessed the observation feed and watched the children. They were still together, sitting close to each other. One of them was crying softly. Another was trying to stay calm, speaking in a quiet voice. The third was looking around, still trying to understand their surroundings. The leader observed them carefully. There was something different about them, something the others had not fully understood. They were afraid, but they were also aware. They were confused, but they were trying to make sense of it. They were small, but not weak. This is why we do not interfere, the leader said quietly. Almost to himself, then he turned away. The order had been given, and now it had to be corrected. The moment the leader gave his command, the entire atmosphere inside the spacecraft changed. What had once felt like a quiet, controlled observation now turned into a tense and urgent situation. The lower-ranking crew members who had started the experiment no longer felt confident. They realized they had made a serious mistake, one that could not be ignored. All activities around the children were immediately stopped. The observation devices were turned off, and the data collection process was paused. The room where the children were kept remained the same. But the way the crew looked at them had changed. Before, they had seen the children as subjects of study now. They began to understand that these were not just subjects, they were individuals who had been taken from their world. Inside the room, the children were still sitting close together. Time felt strange to them. They did not know how long they had been there. It could have been hours, or maybe less. There was no way for them to tell. One of the children had stopped crying, but their eyes were still filled with fear. Another kept asking questions. Even though there was no answer? Are we going home? Where are we? Why is no one talking to us? Their voices were soft but full of confusion. They held on to each other, trying to feel safe in a place that felt completely unknown. The crew watched them again, but this time more carefully. They started noticing things they had ignored before. The way the children comforted each other, the way they stayed close, not wanting to be alone. The way they kept hoping someone would answer them. These were not just reactions. These were emotions, strong, deep, and real. The leader entered the observation area once more. He stood quietly. Watching the children through a transparent barrier, he did not step inside. He did not try to communicate. He simply observed. But this time, with a different understanding. He noticed how one child placed a hand on another's shoulder. Trying to calm them down, he saw how they looked at each other for support, even though none of them knew what was happening. This was something that earlier reports had failed to explain. Humans were not just intelligent. They were connected. The leader turned to the crew. "This is what you did not understand," he said. No one responded. "You believed you could study them like simple organisms," he continued. "But they are not isolated. Their thoughts, their emotions, their actions, they are all connected to each other." The crew members lowered their heads slightly. They were beginning to see their mistake clearly now. The leader then shifted his focus to the next step. The children had to be returned, but it was not as simple as just sending them back. There was still a major problem. The children had already experienced too much. They had seen the inside of the craft. They had seen the beings, even if only briefly. They had felt fear and confusion in a way that would not easily disappear. If they were returned with full memory, they would talk. They would describe everything they had seen. And even if most people did not believe them, some would. That alone could create problems. But removing all their memories was also dangerous. Human minds, especially those of children, were sensitive. Their thoughts were still developing. If the crew tried to erase everything completely, it could damage their ability to think, remember, or even behave normally. The leader had already chosen a middle path. But now it had to be done carefully. He gave clear instructions. The children would not remember the full event. Instead, their memories would become unclear, like a dream that fades after waking up. They might remember strange lights. They might remember a feeling of being somewhere else. They might remember fear or confusion, but they would not remember exact details. They would not remember the faces of the beings clearly. They would not understand what had truly happened. This was the safest option. The crew began preparing the memory adjustment process. It was a delicate procedure. Using technology that interacted directly with the human brain, the goal was not to erase, but to soften, to blur the experience until it no longer felt real. Before starting, the leader gave one final instruction. No harm, he said. The crew understood. Everything had to be done with extreme care. Inside the room, the children suddenly noticed a change. The lights became slightly dimmer, softer than before, a calm, almost gentle feeling spread through the space. It was not something they could explain, but it made them feel a little less afraid. One by one, they began to feel tired. Their eyes grew heavy. The fear that had filled them slowly started to fade. Replaced by a strange sense of calm, one child tried to stay awake, looking around as if trying to understand what was happening, but even they could not resist the feeling. Within moments, all three children had fallen asleep. The crew carefully began the process. They monitored each child closely, making small adjustments, making sure everything remained stable. There was no rush, no sudden movement. Every step was controlled and precise. The leader watched the process from a distance. He did not interfere, but his attention never left the children. For him, this was not just about fixing a mistake. It was about preventing something worse. He knew that even this action, changing their memories, was still a form of interference. But it was necessary now. The situation had already crossed the line. There was no way to undo what had been done completely. All they could do was reduce the damage as the process continued. The children's brain activity began to change. The clear, sharp memories of the spacecraft started to break apart. Images became unclear. Sounds faded. Details disappeared. What remained were only fragments. A bright light, a strange feeling, a sense of being somewhere unfamiliar. Nothing more after the process was complete. The crew checked their condition again. All three children were stable. No signs of harm, no signs of lasting damage. The leader gave a small nod. It was time for the final step. Return them. The spacecraft slowly adjusted its position, moving back toward Earth. It approached the same area from where the children had been taken, the quiet field near the small town. Everything had to happen just as silently as before. No one on the ground could know inside the craft. The children were still asleep. They were carefully placed into the transport system once again. The same technology that had taken them would now return them. The beam activated quietly, one by one. The children were lifted gently in a matter of seconds. They were gone from the room, back on Earth. The field looked exactly as it had before, dark, quiet, and empty. Then, without any sound or warning, the children appeared. They were placed softly on the ground. Close to where they had originally been, the beam disappeared instantly. Above them, the spacecraft moved away, rising higher into the sky until it was completely gone. On the ground, the children remained still for a moment. Then slowly, they began to wake up. Their eyes opened, filled with confusion. They looked around, trying to understand where they were. Something felt strange. Something felt different. But they could not fully explain it. The memory was already fading. Like a dream that slips away the moment you try to remember it. They were back, but not everything had been left behind. The field was quiet again. Just like it had been before everything happened, the night air was cool, and the tall grass moved gently with the wind. Nothing looked unusual. No one standing there would have guessed that something strange had taken place only moments earlier. The three children were lying on the ground, close to each other for a few seconds. They did not move. Then slowly, one of them opened their eyes. Everything felt confusing. The child looked up at the sky, trying to understand what was happening. The stars were there, the same as always. The air smelled like the field they knew. It looked familiar. But something felt different inside soon. The other two children began to wake up as well. They sat up slowly, looking around with uncertain expressions. Their heads felt heavy, as if they had just woken up from a deep sleep. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then one of them asked quietly, "What happened?" No one had a clear answer. They tried to remember. There was something. Something about a bright light, a strange place, a feeling of fear. But the details were missing, like pieces of a puzzle that had been taken away, I think. "We were somewhere else," another child said. Unsure of their own words, the third child shook their head slightly. "I don't know," they replied. "It feels like a dream." That was the closest they could come to explaining it. A dream, but it did not feel like a normal dream. It felt more real than that, and at the same time, harder to remember. Before they could think too much about it, they heard voices in the distance. People were calling their names. The sound grew louder as lights moved across the field. Flashlights cut through the darkness, and footsteps could be heard running closer. The search had not stopped for hours. The town had been looking for them. Families, neighbors, and police had all been searching, refusing to give up hope. And now, suddenly, the children were back. One of the searchers saw movement in the field and shouted, "They're here!" Within seconds, people rushed toward them. The children stood up slowly, still confused. As their parents reached them, the moment was filled with emotion. Mothers and fathers pulled their children close. Holding them tightly as if they would never let go again, tears flowed freely. "You're okay. You're okay," one parent repeated again and again. The children held on to them. Still trying to understand everything, they felt safe now. But the confusion had not gone away. Questions started immediately. Where were you? What happened? Did you go somewhere? The children tried to answer, but their words were uncertain. We were playing. And then, one of them began. They stopped. The memory was not clear enough to explain. There was a light. Another said, yeah. And something strange, the third added. The adults looked at each other, confused. A light? Someone repeated. The children nodded, but even they did not sound sure. It felt weird, one of them said, like we weren't here. The police officers stepped closer. Listening carefully, they asked more questions, trying to understand what had happened. But the answers were always the same, unclear, broken, incomplete. The children could not describe the place they had been. They could not explain how they got there or how they came back. They only remembered feelings, fear, confusion, and something they could not fully describe. The officers searched the area again, this time with even more attention, but just like before. There was nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone else, no evidence of any kind. It was as if the children had simply appeared out of nowhere. The case quickly became something unusual at first. The authorities considered the possibility that the children had wandered off and then returned. But that did not explain the missing time. It did not explain why none of them could clearly remember where they had been. Some people suggested that the children had imagined everything. Maybe they got lost, became scared, and created a story in their minds. But the problem was, all three children told similar things. Not exactly the same, but close enough to raise questions. They all mentioned a light. They all described a strange feeling. They all said it did not feel like a normal place. The town remained unsettled for a few days. Everyone talked about what had happened. People tried to come up with explanations, but none of them felt completely right. Eventually, the authorities made a decision. The case was closed officially. It was labeled as an unexplained incident. The children were safe. There was no evidence of a crime. There was nothing more to investigate. Life slowly returned to normal. The town went back to its quiet routine. People reopened their shops. Children returned to school. and the field became a place of play once again, but something had changed. The families of the children never fully forgot that night. Even though their children were safe, the memory of their disappearance stayed with them. They became more careful, more watchful. The feeling of complete safety was gone for the children. The experience stayed in a different way. As days passed, the memory became weaker. Just like the leader had intended, the clear images faded, leaving behind only small fragments. Sometimes, one of them would suddenly remember something, a flash of light, a strange shape, or a feeling of floating. But it would disappear just as quickly, like trying to hold on to a dream after waking up as they grew older. The children spoke about that night less often, but they never forgot it completely. Every now and then the topic would come up. Do you remember what happened that day? One would ask, kind of. Another would reply, but not clearly. It still feels strange, the third would say. Even as they became adults, their stories did not change much. They always described the same things: a light, a strange place, a feeling of being taken somewhere. Most people did not believe them. They assumed it was just a childhood memory mixed with imagination. But a few people listened carefully. A few people wondered, far above Earth. The spacecraft had already left the area. Inside, everything was quiet again. The leader stood in the command area, reviewing the final report. The incident had been recorded completely. The mistake had been corrected, but the lesson remained. He entered the final note into the system: human species. Not to be directly engaged, he paused for a moment before continuing. High emotional complexity, unpredictable behavior. Potential risk if disturbed. The words appeared on the screen, clear and final. Observation only. Extreme caution advised. With that, the report was complete. The spacecraft moved further away from Earth, disappearing into the vast darkness of space from that moment on. Humans were no longer seen as simple subjects to study. They were something more, something that needed to be understood carefully. From a distance and on Earth, life continued as always. People lived their lives, unaware of how close they had come to something beyond their understanding. But in one small town, on quiet nights, when the sky was clear and the stars were bright, a few people would sometimes look up and wonder what really happened that night. And why did it feel like the answer was still out there, just beyond reach?